Thank you so much for having me here today in that introduction. My name is Daniel. I'm here to talk to you about reuse today. I'm a designer from Sydney, Australia, and I came here in December. And I wanted to start today actually just with a quick story. And it's a story about my first job as a designer. Now, I was in college at the time and I was freelancing, and the job went fine, and the client was all cool, and the work was fine, and it went through. And I had some problem with payment at the end of the job. And being a designer in an early stage of my career, I wasn't really sure how to handle the situation. And a couple of months went by, and I didn't actually know what to do because communication had stopped, and he'd stopped responding to my emails and my phone calls and whatnot. So I thought, I'll go and visit his studio and just confront him and see what's happening face to face. So I went to his studio, and his studio is actually in an area of Sydney which is a little rough around the edges. It's King's Cross, and back in those days it was notorious for a few gangs and prostitution and things like this at the time. And so I was waiting outside his studio. I didn't know when he'd be back, and I was sitting there, and the hours started clocking by, and there were some prostitutes at the corner as well who were waiting there with me. So we ended up getting speaking, and they told me their story, and then I told them mine. And so after a few hours, I had a gang of prostitutes who were backing me up with my story if this guy ever came back. So I had a bit of collateral there, which was cool. They asked me at one point to hide a bag in the bushes behind me, so I don't know what the hell I was participating in at the time, but it was all good. Anyway, side note, the guy came back, and thankfully my newly founded friends weren't there at the time to cause a bit of drama. And the problem was resolved, and the payment was put through after some heated discussion, of course. Now, I'm telling you this story for two reasons. Firstly being, the experience really challenged me as a designer and a creative. And secondly, I haven't had a problem of the same caliber with client payments since that first inception. Now, this will make sense with reuse in one sec. What I want to do quickly is just to define reuse and think about how this comes back into the fold. So reusing an item again once it's been used, so that's conventional reuse where it's for the same function, and then new life reuse at the same time. Now that's with an individual article or unit, and also a piece of news or information, which means we've got tangible reuse and we've got intangible reuse as well. And I want to actually cover both today in terms of the work that I do and also what I've learned across my career and how I've reused that to grow as a designer and feed that back into the community at large as well. Okay, so we have knowledge, and then we go through experience, we make mistakes through that experience, and then we reflect on that, absorb it, and then feed that back into reuse with knowledge again. Okay, a little bit about myself, just to give some context. I've been alive for approximately 10,510 days. I've been designing for approximately 12,320 hours, which means about 3,850 cups of coffee. I love holistic design. I love to form connections between people, ideas, and problems. I love to be on two wheels. I love to formulate ideas with two or more people and brainstorm. Travel is an essential part of what I do, and facial hair is not too bad at the same time as well. Okay, this is my first project that I want to talk to you about in terms of my work. Now, this was my graduation project, and it was called Extra Cheese, and it was about the idea of the artist community and the design community and the differences between those two communities and how we could get those social groups talking together. I was actually also really interested in reuse at the time, so I wanted to start promoting that within creative practice in Sydney as well. So this was the logo that was done for it, and it was actually an exhibition series as it started off in, which were done on reused pizza boxes. So the first series had 50 different participating artists and designers, and all the work was submitted on reused pizza boxes. So there was a good selection across the board. Gave me a good experience with that. And this was a couple of pictures from the opening night. And it was a pretty good success, the show. We had about 350 people come down for the opening night. The police came through to shut down the show, which I think is usually a good example of a good show. It was a success. And that was just my graduation project. That was going to be a one-off sort of piece, but everyone who was involved in the show really wanted to see it be brought to life again and be redone again. So I decided to run the show again in a second year, and this was for the second stage. This was the promotional piece that I designed and photographed for it. Now, I wanted to rewrite the brief for the second stage of the show because I think it's important as a designer to not only challenge yourself and keep yourself engaged, but also the participating artists as well. So the brief changed for the second stage, and the idea was really about the found object. And I was visiting at the time a lot of creative studios and noticing that they had obviously they'd hoarded a lot of things over the years, and I wanted to see those objects actually being brought to life. So I rewrote the brief to be about found object, which could be anything that they chose. And there are a lot of good pieces that came out. So we had some old wooden bowls. There were some shoes that were illustrated. Some people approached the brief very differently in terms of a painting which was actually painted using found objects. So a Barbie's head and an old paw from a stuffed doll. There was some old NFL helmet, which was painted up. Someone made quite a political statement and situated a homeless man in the corner with old found blankets and shoes, and an old esky as well. Okay, again, the project had really started taking momentum. It had really facilitated networks for me within the community by this stage. So I thought, okay, what the hell, let's do one last one, a third show. And by this stage, it had taken momentum, and we ended up having the show down at the Saatchi & Saatchi Gallery in Sydney, which I was fortunate enough to obtain through contacts. This was all running on no budget as well, these whole shows, so I was kind of doing it on the side as I was entering into the design industry at the time. I was in magazines. And this was the promotional piece that I worked with for the show. So I wanted to use the promotional pieces as ways to actually supplement my portfolio and then explore different areas which I hadn't yet touched upon. So I wanted to look at art directing and photo shoots. So I used the opportunity to actually do that. And this piece changed again with the brief in terms of I actually paired an artist and a designer together to produce one work. So I really wanted to start pushing that idea of the two communities coming together and how I can facilitate that. So this work, this photo shoot involved, I walked into a large man's shop, shall we say, and bought the largest t-shirt I could find, and then reconstructed it with 2 neck holes, and then I did a shoot with an artist and a designer, and pretty much posing them the question. If you posed an artist and designer the same question, they'd come back with very different responses. So bring me a cap, or show me a screen, for instance. So these were some of the pieces from the show, and then a couple of pictures from the opening night as well. Okay, so what did I actually learn from this experience? How did I feed that back into my practice? Well, one, your network is really like your family, so treat them well. And that's been very crucial for me in my design practice in terms of facilitating networks, contacting people, understanding how they work, and then using that as a springboard as a catalyst for my career. Okay, so as I was curating exhibitions, the next year, because I'd made contacts within these various fields, I started moving into some bigger and better things. At the time, I started getting into education, and I was teaching at college, and so Seesaw was the project that came from that. I partnered up with a couple of other people to give it a bit more scope, And essentially, we were looking at the idea of cross-institutional learning. So we took the five of the major design colleges within Sydney, and we had students from each of the college. We paired them up and then gave them an industry mentor to actually oversee them for 2 days within a studio, where they answered a brief based on reusing materials, so just crafts and art pieces, so paper, pens, things like this. And then they needed to answer a brief based on design fundamentals and actually install the work in the gallery after 2 days. Now, what we were actually interested in the time as well was the community's response to the design process. So we filmed the students and the mentors working within the space and live streamed it into another part of the gallery, so the audience could actually come through across the 2 days and get more of a fundamental understanding for how the design process works. So these were the product and object students, and they were looking at shape and balance and the idea of communication across a table. We had fashion students, so they were looking at texture and form, and the idea you step into these installations that they created, and then there were these amazing, beautiful paper sort of sculptures on the inside. Color and hierarchy, so these were the interiors and architectural students, and they installed these pieces throughout the gallery and then actually positioned the lighting to create different bands of shade, and then created a whole hex code system based off those shadows, which is very cool. Typography and semantics, these were the graphics students, and they created a whole alphabet based on the golden ratio, and then constructed these objects within the space as well to start, so people could actually interact with that typography. Rhythm and pattern were the digital students, the last group, and they started looking at the relationship between 3D space and 2D space, so using the projector that we had in the space and then painting a room in perspective and how that sort of translates. Some of the posters from the show, the promotional material, and some shots from the opening night too. So by this stage, this was after 4 years now, so the Extra Cheese was an annual thing, and this was the year after. I felt like I was slipping a bit from my design practice. I was moving into more a production role. So, but what I learned from the experience was really to utilize your interests within your practice. And at the time, my interests fell heavily within education as I was teaching, and also that idea of how I can facilitate these networks. And once you use your interests, people tend to see through the bullshit if you don't do that, if you just try and make it up on the fly. Okay, this is the little spiel of text from my brand that Jürgen was telling you about at the introduction. I'm not going to read through it because it's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's up on the website. It took me about 3 days to write that, and it actually does make sense. It's not just gibberish, and it does sort of pertain to my interests and what I was trying to do with my practice at the time as well. So as I said, I wanted to move a lot more back into a design role, and so I started getting into the world of branding and identity construction. So of course, what I started off with was my own branding, my self-branding. So these are my cards. I was looking, my father was a tool maker, and so I grew up with a lot of CAD around the house and tools and building things. So I'm fascinated and obsessed with patterning, so that came into the fold with typography. And I actually really wanted to take this further because I see branding and identity really as an extension of the person or the company itself. And so I thought about how I can make this a bit more tongue-in-cheek through the cards. And I thought back to my childhood, and I used to read a lot of Enid Blyton books and the Famous Five, and they always used to make secret messages to each other that the bad guys in the books couldn't see. So I wanted to see how I can start bringing that as an idea, and I started experimenting a little bit with lemon juice. And if you use lemon juice and iron on a piece of paper, it actually brings up secret messages. And that didn't really work so much because of the stock that I was using. It was a cotton stock, so it soaked up. So I ended up using UV ink and stamps to come into the fold. So I've been actually handing out secret messages for the past year and a half. So if you've ever received my card, you'll have one sitting on the back. So these were some of the initial messages that I was doing. When I drink scotch, I get great ideas. Don't forget to feed me. Things to talk to me about. Trends, East Coast, West Coast, big hair, typography, Ted Danson, because he's awesome, and beer. And this was some feedback. I had a client at the time who was always like, it'll be really quick, it'll take 5 minutes. It's really frustrating, so don't tell me that, don't tell me that. And it's actually shifted now, and I realized that that was quite more of a personal messages that I was putting out there, and I wanted to put messages out there that were a bit more about the working relationship that I could foster with clients. So let's create something memorable, and we could be very happy together, 2 examples. So these are constantly in flux and changing over time as well. And actually, the other day, I gave a card out to someone over here in Berlin, and realized that I double stamped the card, and it said, "Don't ever tell me, let's create something memorable," which is a bit... He contacted me, and we both had a bit of a laugh, and then have collaborated, so I guess it worked, I don't know. Okay, now what I really learned from this experience, surround yourself with like-minded people and good things really do tend to happen. I view that process and that ritual of handing out a card to someone as a very personal experience, and when you surround yourself with like-minded people, always sort of good things tend to happen. Okay, so as I was getting into branding, I started looking at people I knew and good people I was surrounding myself with. Now this is the brand suite that I was constructed for a makeup and beauty artist, Annie Hall, in Sydney. She she was writing for Vogue at the time, and she was also working on a lot of photo shoots, and she wanted to really reposition herself as a director of creativity and of sorts. So we thought, we had a good brainstorming session and thought how we can actually bring that into the fold and make sense of it. So a really sort of simple and clean and masculine typeface for the logo, with the tweaks. Simple color palette with 3 different colors, which actually related to 3 different spaces within Sydney that really inspired her. So we had the Art Gallery of New South Wales and Gordons Bay, and then Centennial Park. Now I wanted to actually take this further as well in terms of how can we transport the viewer or the receiver of her cards and her brand back to those places as well. So we looked at flowers and how we can scent the cards according to the different spaces and actually use a different sense to bring the viewer back to that time and that place. And then looking at flowers as well to start creating typography and being a bit playful with the brand too as promotional pieces. And with the smell, of course, that related back to the industry that she was a part of with makeup and beauty. So what I really took from this is view every working relationship as a co-creation to create interesting dialogue with your client. And I viewed that relationship with the client as a back and forth process where we can actually start building foundations for her together and in tandem. And it was a lot more fun to work that way too. Okay, so by this stage I'd started really rolling forward with clients, and I picked up a brand which was a vintage shop on Crown Street in Sydney. And they were actually looking for a rebrand. They had vintage clothes that they stocked, and also they had their own line of clothing as well that they wanted to facilitate within the shop. So I wanted to actually think about how the brand reflected on that process of shopping and the experience with that, and how it could, how the identity could make sense of that experience as well. So the idea that the brand should be about almost putting on an outfit as well, and mixing and matching between the old and the new. At the time, letterpress in Sydney was really starting to take off with a few different brands that were pushing it. And so I was looking at typography within letterpress to inspire me. And then the idea that the logo itself should constantly be in flux, and the logo would change, and you can actually mix and match the letters according to, you know, the month or wherever the brand was at that time. This sort of came through then in the signage. So I went down to an old lumberyard and picked up all these old pieces of timber and got them cut. And all of these pieces of, all of this typography was actually situated on a slide rail within the sign, so you could take them off and mix and match so that the sign could actually change month to month, which I thought was quite cool, because generally when you walk down a street, all the time, every day, and if something just changes slightly within the sign, you might think a bit twice about the shop. And then that was the other side. And the benefit of doing this as well was once the brand built and more typography was added to it, you could actually use the letters as display devices within the shop as well. So it was kind of saving cost as well for the client. And then a really simple stationery kit with oversized stamps to come through, and just using, again, reused materials with the old string and recycled card, and keeping that look and feel for a vintage feel. Now from that experience, through the client experience, I really did learn, leave your ego at the door, and that's a golden rule with any sort of design and creativity, and yeah. Okay, so things were progressing more, and this is, I think, the last piece of work I'm going to show you today. This is the Project Factory. So this is a digital agency in Sydney, and they actually work with, they're in the gaming and mobile space. So they have clients within the television, but then they also have gamers as consumers as well. So the brand actually needed to be really flexible across those different target audiences. And I started thinking about what really, well, we had a really great workshop session with the whole team. There was about 8 people, and I wanted every single person involved, which is really beneficial to get that information out of them and get that knowledge. And started to think about what actually, what constitutes games and how we can position them in a fun and sort of creative way. So I started looking at the Rubik's Cube as really the motif for the brand, and as a bit of a throwback to old traditional games, and also the idea that they're in the online world of digital, and so pixels as a basic form is a square and something that you can actually interact with. So we started looking at the Rubik's Cube, and then bringing in a very simple 3 or 4 color palette to actually start giving multiple iterations for the brand too. Now they wanted to be seen as producers of high volume of work, so I created a whole asset suite of symbols that could be interchanged with the logo as well, and start giving the brand a bit more of a kinetic feel in its usage. So then those symbols can be used across the stationery. I've got a very sort of simple border motif, and then some of the cards as well. Now you can see with the cards, I've actually, one of the design principles with the brand was to run typography at a vertical and a horizontal fashion, because I wanted that reflection of people turning the card to sort of reflect that idea of turning a Rubik's Cube and keep that quite interactive at the same time. And simple website. And then again, using the brand as artwork within the studio at the same time as well. So from this, really, the knowledge that I took is integrated team participation creates a personal connection to the output, and it gave them a lot of scope to actually choose the brand that they wanted to integrate within the company. Okay, so I just wanted to finish up. What can we actually do to encourage knowledge reuse as individuals, and then as a community as well, and then ultimately growth within that? So firstly, seek out like-minded studios, artists, designers whose work you like, and just simply create a connection with them. And if you do run a studio, host an open day every so often and start connecting with those who are really looking to learn. Notice patterns, experiment often, and start making connections between those. Next time you're at an art opening, try talking about the art. And create a personal dialogue with your environment and start telling stories through that as well. So, slow down, reflect often on your practice and the knowledge that you learn, and then think about how you can actually reuse that within your own practice and then within those around you as well. Thank you.